We had agreed very early on, like, we're doing this. We're going full force into this. And what does that look like? Oh, well, I've got credit cards and I have a life insurance policy that I can take from. And my husband can borrow from his 401k. And, Lisa moves in with her parents. And, so we're making all of these like, okay, how are we going to pull up this money and where's it going to come from?
The startup investment landscape is changing, and world-class companies are being built outside of Silicon Valley. We find them, talk with them, and discuss the upside of investing in them. Welcome to Upside.
Woo!
Hello, and welcome to the Upside Podcast, the first podcast finding upside outside of Silicon Valley. I'm Eric Hornung, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Mr. Educational Upbringing himself, Jay Klaus. Jay, how often were you smacked on the knuckles with rulers growing up?
Not enough, honestly. Needed more of that. No, that was not the form of, corporal punishment? Capital punishment?
Catholic punishment, mostly?
Catholic punishment. That was not the form of punishment in my household, but you are right, which I think we talked about on the show before. Both my parents were high school teachers growing up, took both of their classes in high school, as a matter of fact, and just about my entire extended family, high school or middle school teachers, including my sister and her husband, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. Everybody's teaching, Eric.
Did you try harder when it was your parents as the teacher or less hard when it was your parents as the teacher?
I wouldn't say I tried more or less hard, but I can tell you that my mother's class is where I was closest to getting an A- in high school.
Wait, you got an A in every class in high school?
I had over a 4.0. I was a valedictorian.
You with your little subtle brag there. Look at that. You tried to sneak that by.
No, I thought it was obvious.
It should have been. That's my fault. 200 episodes in, I should have known that you were the valedictorian of your high school.
And here's where that really plays against you. I thought my mom's class was boring. There, I said it. I didn't appreciate it at the time. She taught English. I forget Oh, I'm so sorry, Mom. I forget exactly what the class was. I think it was...
Your mom listens to this podcast.
Oh, she does. I forget the class, but I just thought it was kind of boring, and I would fall asleep sometimes because it was in the afternoon, and our classes, we got to school at 6:30 in the morning, and I slept in class from time to time, which would come up at dinner. And she would say, I think you need to go to bed earlier because you're falling asleep in class. And I would say, well, your class is boring. Yeah, rough semester.
Do you ever think that maybe that's the reason you were close to an A- in that class?
It's very possible.
Well, teachers have they have a tough go of it, Jay. I think a lot of people are seeing now with this whole COVID thing, dealing with one little human is a lot, but dealing with 30 of them at a time all day, every day.
Yeah, I think working at an elementary or even just a K through 12 level is a really difficult job, both as a teacher and as we'll probably find out today, Eric, because we're talking with Lisa Kathman and Sarah Bevier. They are the co-founders of SLP Toolkit. SLP Toolkit is a web-based app with built-in assessments and tools that give a school-based speech language pathologist the confidence she needs to take charge of her busy caseload. Eric, I have a feeling that the speech language pathologists in the school system are struggling just as much as the teachers are these days, and I'm sure that will come up in our conversation.
I think she wanted to go by Bevier, just so we're on the same page.
She wanted to go by Bevier, but can confirm it's pronounced Bevier, and I will not apologize for pronouncing it correctly.
It's like the Colbert thing, When he became famous, he went from Stephen Colbert to Stephen Colbert.
I don't know all that much about speech language pathologists. I do know that it seems like a really noble profession and helps people with speech language challenges to live their best life. And speaking of living their best life, this episode is sponsored by Ethos Wealth Management, helping people live the one life they have to live the best way that they can.
And you can find out more about Ethos at upside.fm/ethos. We're going to jump into this interview in a second here, Jay. But
one more thing that we should mention. SLP Toolkit, which was founded in 2015, has been bootstrapped this whole time.
And I love talking to a bootstrap company because you have the optionality, if you're profitable, to raise capital and grow like crazy or not.
Bootstrapped in Phoenix, Arizona, no less. And I believe this is definitely our first Phoenix company, if not our first Arizona company.
Shout out to Matt Simpson, who connected with us on Twitter and introduced us to SLP Toolkit. We're excited to talk to more Phoenix companies or just Arizona companies in general. If you are a Arizonan company or know an Arizonan company that would like to be on the podcast, reach out to us on Twitter at UpsideFM or send us something a little longer at hello@upside.fm. And we'll get to this interview right after this. Let's bring in Devin Spencer, an employment attorney at Taft, Stettinius, and Hollister, to teach us about handling employee matters. Taft is a full-service firm known for assisting entrepreneurs across the heartland. As a reminder, the following remarks by Taft attorneys are for informational purposes only and are not legal advice. This information is not intended to create, and receipt of it does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. No person or organization should act upon this information without first seeking professional counsel.
Devin, something that comes up a lot with founders that I talk to in Columbus and outside of Columbus is the difference between contractors and employees and when it makes sense to hire one or the other. Can you help us to understand that difference and when a founder should consider hiring a contractor versus an employee?
Your company must classify or treat workers as either independent contractors or employees. You also have to further classify employees as exempt or non-exempt, but I won't go into that with the time we have. Employees generally must be paid minimum wage and overtime pay, and the company pays employment taxes and Social Security for employees. Independent contractors are not subject to those minimum wage and overtime pay requirements, and the company doesn't pay those employment taxes for independent contractors. Wrongfully classifying or treating employees as independent contractors can be a major source of very expensive liability. Unfortunately, there is no bright line test to determine whether an individual is an independent contractor or an employee. The short answer is that it is all about your company's oversight and control of the nature of the work and how the workers perform it. If you are only controlling the results of the work, you may have an independent contractor. On the other hand, if you retain oversight over the method and the manner of the work, it is likely an employee. The law, not you, decides whether you've hired an independent contractor or an employee. You must structure the working relationship to either retain or relinquish control to the worker over the nature of the work and how they perform it. If it is a task where it makes sense to only care about the result, not the means to that result, you may have an independent contractor. If your company controls the nature of the work and how the workers are performing it, you probably have an employee. I will say the Department of Labor, which enforces these laws, has been cracking down on misclassification like crazy lately. Your company could end up paying a lot of back pay, taxes, and benefits if you get it wrong.
Devin, if people want to learn more about Taft or yourself, where should they go?
Our website is www.taftlaw.com, and you can search by practice group or individual attorney. If you search my name, you will find my bio that says a little bit more about the areas I practice in, and it also has my contact information. So shoot me an email or give me a call.
Sarah, Lisa, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having us.
So before we started recording here, we had a lot of fun with some jokes and hypothetical questions that I don't understand. And it was obvious to me that you guys have a lot of rapport together. So instead of hearing your individual backgrounds, I'd love to actually start with the history of your friendship and how you've gotten to know each other.
Well, we're not friends yet. We're still working on that. No, just kidding. No, it's funny. We entered into this journey of business hardly knowing each other, which we know in retrospect is kind of crazy to start hey, why don't we do this and just start a business?
Right.
Like it's such an easy thing to do, but it's worked out so far.
Yeah.
But we met as we're both speech language pathologists. We were working in the largest school district in the state of Arizona. And I was the lead SLP. So I had known Sarah because I was part of the hiring process and then met her a couple of times on some training things that I did. But really, we had zero history together before that.
Yeah.
which could have maybe even been a good thing. I say that it was maybe a bad thing, but I think of like even friendships when you try to do business or be, in a roommate situation or whatever, that can work out very differently than you expect. So we didn't go in with any expectations other than the focus on our business.
How large is the largest school district in Arizona?
Student-wise, I think they're around like maybe 70,000 students. I always think of it in terms of how many speech therapists did we have in the district, and we were at about 125. So nothing like, to compare that to something like New York City Public Schools, they have about 2,000 speech therapists. But the way that Arizona does it is each little suburb has their own school district versus, it's not consolidated like some of the bigger cities.
How does someone become interested in becoming an SLP?
I think everybody's story is kind of different. I know for me, I knew I wanted to go into something to do with education. I wanted to work with children. And so, it was that, am I going to be a teacher? What does it look like? What am I going to do? So going into college, knowing I'm going into that setting, and then hearing about the field of speech language pathology. And I've always said my only talent is talking. I feel like it's my greatest strength. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I think I could actually have something to offer here. I love communication. I love talking to people. And so if I can help other children who are having difficulties in that area, then it's kind of just a win-win. And so that's how I learned about the field. And so then that kind of led me on the path to getting my undergrad in speech and hearing science, and then a master's degree in communication disorders.
And I feel like a lot of people are drawn to the field because they have somebody that they know. So whether it be a sibling, oftentimes, that had some sort of communication, a disability that involved communication impairment. And so that draws a lot of people to the field. But I agree with you. Everybody's journey is a little bit unique.
This is the part of the show where I admit my ignorance, which is coming in sooner than usual in the interviews. Speech language pathology is something that a lot of my peers when they went to college said they're going to study for, and I've heard the term a lot, but it's still kind of unknown to me what that covers and what the breadth of that means. Can you help define what a speech language pathologist does?
Yes. First of all, let me start by saying you're not the only one. I think if you do know what it is, you're in the actual minority. We even working
probably are one.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Even working on a campus, and every campus should have a speech language pathologist working with the students, and still the staff very often doesn't even know what it is we do. And I don't know if that's just because there's not a lot of us. If you haven't had a personal experience with one, then you would have no reason to know. But what it is it's we are working directly with, in our case, pediatric population, but it could be adults who've had some kind of impairment in communication. So whether that's speech, so they could have difficulties producing sounds, or they could have something like a fluency disorder, so stuttering, or it's in the area of language. So then you're talking about difficulties with expressive language, like vocabulary and grammar, or receptive language, difficulties with comprehension. And then there's also social language. So that's individuals we might be working with who have difficulties with social skills. So that could be somebody with autism, or, in other areas that impact their pragmatic language. So we kind of work with this wide range of individuals in all areas of communication.
How much of that is theoretical or kind of talking about it versus practical and hands-on either experiments or activities?
As far as your training to become an SLP, or when you're working with actual individuals?
I guess I don't know how to answer that question.
And I think, I hope we're not doing a lot of theory when we're working with people, because it goes back to, I even think, like, if I think about what we learn in grad school, it is a lot of theory. It's a lot on the research. It's a lot about how you find information in order to apply to whatever patients or clients or students that you're working with. And so that's why a lot of us feel like we should come out of school with this, ability to treat anybody and anything. We're the expert. So even like your first job, you're supposed to be the expert all of a sudden. And so what tends to happen in our field is everyone kind of goes through this like, oh crap, I missed that day that they gave out the magic wands. And I'm too, I don't know if it's embarrassed or whatever to say it, to ask somebody else, like, so when did you get your magic wand? And so we kind of go through this point in our career where you feel like you should know everything, because I think people expect you to know everything in that particular area. But then you realize, it is a lot of, you're working with individuals. Every individual is different. And so you do a lot of on the job kind of training. So people are not concrete. Everybody, even if they have the same kind of issue going on, it's all filtered through their brains. They respond to things differently. Even if you think of the two of you, one of you might be more of a visual learner, one might be a verbal learner. You have different preferences. And so it's a people-based job. So you never know what you're going to get, which is kind of part of the fun of it, especially for us. We love working with kids. So they are definitely always keeping you on your toes.
Yeah. The other part that could be maybe a problem in the field is it's very broad. So we go to school, and after we get a degree, we can work in any setting. So we can work with pediatrics or adults, and those are very, very different. Working in a medical setting with an adult who had a stroke and is relearning how to speak or has deficits in their language is very different than working with a child who's never had those skills. And so in the school setting, and I think that's kind of, hopefully will lead into how we even got into the position we're in now, is in the school setting, we have to know something about everything. So in the medical setting, I might only work with adults, and it might only be outpatient rehab. So, post-stroke, or I'm only working with individuals who have difficulty swallowing. But in the school setting, I have to work with the most mild to severe cases, everything in between, all ages from preschool through 21 years of age. So it's this very broad amount of information we have to have. So we get the theory in school, and we get some clinical practice, but then we're put into this setting where we never know who's going to be on our caseload, what we're going to have to specialize in. So we have to be these like jack of all trades. And so it's a huge challenge.
Versus like pediatrics in general, you have people that aren't working in schools that work in clinics. And so they tend to be able to, whether they're specializing or not, it might be that they're like, oh, I just want to work with this age of population, or I just want to work with kids that have apraxia, or kids that, whatever it is, whatever their specialty is, autism. Versus in the schools, I can't turn anyone away. So I am given a caseload, and like Sarah said, it's preschool through high school. I might be the only speech therapist in my district, if I work in a really tiny district. So I might be traveling to multiple schools. And to reinforce that point, I can't say no to anyone. If I'm working in a clinical setting, I have the option to choose who I want to work with. And so that puts an added level of pressure for students, or for SLPs working with students in the schools, because you have to know a little about everything.
Yeah.
In the adult case, or the case of a stroke, it sounds like there's an event that can be kind of predicted that they're going to need some help. In a school setting, how and when is it realized that a child or an adolescent is going to need speech language pathology?
That is such a great question. It really depends. As oftentimes, it's the parents who recognize that something might be different, that this child's not maybe speaking as early as they would expect, or,
They compare them to siblings.
Yeah.
So, or cousins or whatever.
Yeah.
And teachers do that too. I feel like teachers will also refer, because they're like, this kid looks a little different than the other kids in my class.
Right. But a lot of times it isn't known until they're in school, and now they're put in this situation where, there's so many factors. So one, I need access to curriculum. I have to be capable of being a learner. Now I also have to learn how to negotiate with my teacher and my peers. And I have to have play skills and cooperation and all of these other things. And so once now I'm in this environment, things start to show up. Either something's impacting their ability to learn, or you just can, there's a noticeable difference between them and their same-aged peers. It could happen as early as kindergarten. We've had students who are referred even later in life where it doesn't it's not as recognizable.
But there is federal protection. So these students get services because it's federal law. So there are laws in effect that are implemented for students with disability. And it goes back to that statement that Sarah said, every student has the right to access their curriculum. So when you have students with disabilities, then they are given free speech therapy in the schools to help them just like, access the curriculum just like their peers can.
One quick follow-up on that. Is it usually the case that a teacher or somebody involved with the student refers them to the therapist and they confirm, yeah, there's work that we need to be done here? Or do they come to the therapist once some other doctor or physician has said the student needs therapy?
Depends on their age. I think a lot of referrals come in for early intervention, that's birth to 3, from doctors. So parents might have concerns and they go to their pediatrician, and the pediatrician writes a little prescription for them to there are services for birth to 3 as well that are free. So it can come in that way. It can come in from the teachers that are doing referrals. So it just depends on what age the kid is, what the issues are. Some kids are born. I mean, if you think about kids that are born with a hearing impairment or who are deaf, then they are doing hearing tests at birth. Or if you have a kid that is born with Down syndrome, there are typical communication issues that are associated with certain disabilities. So there are some kids that get services from birth, and it's not necessarily communication. We also work in the scope of feeding and swallowing and things like that. So you might be working, with those really young students with some of that kind of stuff.
How much of this job overlaps with like being a guidance counselor when it's in schools?
I actually have always said my probably greatest strength I think I had as a practitioner was my rapport with students. And it was the thing that I actually enjoyed the most, is being there for these students who are struggling in different aspects of their life. And so it might not, it could be their home life or something else that's going on. And so we definitely have to be able to provide that support system for this child outside of the therapy that I'm doing, as well as for these families, especially if they're hearing for again, like Lisa said, there's going to be situations where the child is born with something that we know is going to be comorbid with communication. There's going to be communication delays. But if you've had this child and you've not noticed anything, and now all of a sudden they're in school and these signs are starting to present, and we do this thorough evaluation and determine that this student does have something going on. Now we're also supporting those parents in doing counseling.
But no one really knows what our role is. So even going back to the idea of how are we compared to a guidance counselor, we are one of those weird roles because we're therapists, but then we get cast in a school setting as we kind of look like teachers because we're working with students, we're pulling them in regularly, and we're teaching them things. So there's a big controversy in our field. People get really, upset when they're called a speech teacher, which Sarah and I are kind of funny. We're like, I don't care. As long if you even know my name, I'm kind of happy. So it's every setting's a little bit different. And I would say probably our closest relation to other jobs working in schools are the school psychologists, because they work with assessments and identifying disabilities for students, and then also special education teachers, because they're providing individualized, specially designed instruction for students that are based around this document called an IEP. So every student that is found eligible with a disability, once they're found eligible, every year they have to have this individualized education plan, which maps out all of their strengths, all of their needs. It identifies goals that the student needs to learn for the year. And it's sort of their protection as far as even thinking about that whole idea of access to curriculum and that every student should have it. Well, some students learn differently. So maybe I have a student that is in third grade and has a learning disability. Then that student may not be learning math at the third grade level. They might actually have skills that are more like a first grader. So they have goals to work on math, and they're not held to the same accountability necessarily as general ed kind of third grade students.
So thank you for sharing all that context, because that really helps me ask the rest of the questions in this interview. Lisa, I see here that you started as a speech language pathologist in 1997, and Sarah, you started around 2006. You guys started SLP Toolkit around 2015. So help us understand that period of time leading up to SLP Toolkit, and what was the moment where you said, we've got to do something here?
For me personally, when I started in the field, I wasn't really sure where I wanted to work. I ended up working with pediatrics and did the whole gamut. So I worked in homes with birth to 3, worked in preschools in the Caribbean for a while, ended up working in school districts in California and Arizona. And so I was working as a school SLP, and eventually over the years got that position as the lead SLP. And so for me, it was an evolution of figuring out kind of where I wanted to land. And I know Sarah will talk about her experience too, but she's been exclusively in schools. For me, it took a while to get there. But when I got there, I was like, wow, this is the most contextualized place and relevant place for kids to be using their language, because it's almost like the job that they go to every day. They're there for 6 to 7 hours a day, and they're using communication all day long with their peers, with their teachers, in order to understand what's being taught to them, in order to express their learning. So it's a very different context than even at home. I mean, sometimes at home, we're using very basic sort of communication. So that's where it took me a while to get to that point where then I was able to see, as the lead SLP and having been an SLP myself, I'm like, wow, there's some issues though that are going on for school-based SLPs and the challenges that we face. And I'm sure you can talk a little bit more about, your experience too about we see the same things.
Yeah. Like Lisa said, I've always only ever worked in the school setting. It's odd to say. It's kind of I don't know how to say this, like maybe looked down upon to go into the schools.
It's not glamorous. Like if you're working in a voice clinic in Nashville with country music stars,
right? Or
you're working in this, post, acute phase of stroke patients where it's life and death and you feel like it's, like Grey's Anatomy or something.
Right.
So the schools are considered a job that you end up in and not a job that you choose, which we both get, offended by because we're like, we did choose this. This is such an amazing place to work. And we probably see more in this setting than the other settings because of that variety we referenced earlier, that you never know what you're going to get. And we have to treat all students of all ages.
Yeah. So I'm working in the schools and Lisa kind of talked about this early on. It's a little bit of, a kind of a type A individual who's in this profession, and everybody prides themselves on being this expert, and I never felt like that. Once I was practicing, I saw all the holes in my learning and that connection to clinical relevance. And so I remember sitting there working on these treatment plans and trying to identify what it is I'm going to want to target with this individual, or I don't even know where to go about treating this person, and I've got a caseload of 65 very different students. And so I'm not sure where to go. And I'm literally the only one on the campus and thinking, where am I supposed to get this information? And how did everybody else learn this but me? And so as I'm, starting to kind of be willing to ask questions, is when I realized we don't all know these things. We're all struggling. We've got not only this complexity to the knowledge we have to have, but we have all of these paperwork requirements that are federally mandated that require a lot of attention. And so I struggled with all of it. And I thought, this is where I want to be. I want to work in this setting. I've got to figure out how to make this work. And there has got to be a better way. And that led to a conversation with Lisa, just having these conversations about we've got to find more efficient ways to be able to determine student strengths and needs. And we need to find a better way to determine progress. And I'm really struggling with this data piece. And so, that was conversations that were had that we realized we're not the only ones that were having it. It's just nobody else was talking about it.
So when did the breakthrough come that you said, let's solve those problems?
I put out an all call to all of the SLPs in the district asking for help on a particular project. And the project was, we've referenced this idea of IEPs, and kids all have their individualized goals written into their plans. And so as speech therapists, we have to, every grading period, send out a speech report card, similar to they get in their other subject areas. And so there was this idea of making that more streamlined. And I was like, okay, great. We've got 125 people in the district. Let's do a project in the school where we can get some things developed and it will benefit, the greater good in our district. All SLPs will then have access to these. So I sent out my email and I got one response.
Yes.
Sarah. And so that led to us meeting up to kind of talk about it a little bit more. And so when we were having the conversation amongst ourselves, it was probably November. So for us, working in the schools, even if you think back to your college days or whatever, when you're coming up on that winter break, not a lot happens. Summer break, not a lot happens. So that was sort of how it went. As we were talking, we set some goals for ourselves. We're like, we'll reconvene after winter break and see where you are. You do this, I'll do this. Well, we meet up after winter break. Nothing was done, not one thing. And so we started really talking at that point more about, it really evolved. It was kind of weird. We felt this shift in energy during this conversation because we both started opening up about dreams and possibilities and whatever, and came to the conclusion mutually that this is not a school project. That's why it's not getting done, because we are already so full in our day-to-days that, to add something on, it was a great idea, but it's never going to happen during our normal work hours. And why would we work outside of work for our school district? Not that we put in a lot of hours outside of work, but why would we do this and make a project and, not be compensated for it? And that's really when we decided, let's make a business. Let's make it happen. We just laugh because one of the early tasks that we did was we still had to have content that we produced for the app. So we had to write out material. And so we had decided we were going to meet every Friday to start at Sarah's house. And I am very organized with my time because I have to be, especially at that time, I was working 2 jobs. I had my full-time job in the schools. I was seeing kids on the weekends as clients in their homes. And then I was a single mom to 2 elementary aged kids. So I had a lot going on. Time had to be scheduled and managed. So we put it on the calendar and I'm like, well, if it's on the calendar, then it happens. That's just how my world works. And Sarah always talks about, please.
Well, I was exhausted. I mean, worked a full week and it's a tough job that takes a lot of brain energy. And so every Friday I would just pray, like, I hope she doesn't show up. And then she'd knock on that door.
Hello.
And she showed up. And so I think that's the other benefit to having the partner, right? Because otherwise, in my eyes, it was just going to be this like really great idea. But Lisa showed up every Friday and really kicked that off.
So real quick, before we get a little bit deeper into the business itself, you talked about all of these reporting requirements for the therapist at the school level and the case workload, sometimes 65 students per person. It sounds a lot like the stories that I hear from high school teachers also, and the increased requirements from a federal reporting level, the increased number of students, at the same time, usually, not an increase in pay. Can you help me understand, if I'm coming out of college and taking a speech language pathology job at a school, what is that salary like so that we can compare that to like a teacher's salary?
Yeah, it depends on where you are in the nation, obviously, just like it would with the teacher. But we have to have a master's degree to practice, where a lot of educators get master's degrees, but can come out of school with a bachelor's degree and start teaching. And then if they go and get their master's degree, they'll see a boost in their salary. But still, in comparison, I know, just based off my own experience, SLPs in the Valley made probably anywhere from $55,000 to $65,000.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say? Where a teacher was making somewhere in the range of probably $35,000 to $45,000.
As a start, yeah.
Yeah. We do tend to make a little bit higher salary. Now, that's the case where we are. I've heard other areas where they're on the same pay scale as teachers. And so it just depends, I think, geographically.
Before SLP Toolkit, before all this, if someone had to file that paperwork or someone had to manage their caseload, what are like the tools of the trade?
Manila folders.
Yeah.
Reams of white paper.
Lots of binders full of data sheets. Yeah.
Binders.
Yeah, lots of binders. Now, we did have IEP software. So that's the part where we're writing the treatment plan. So that's been around for, I think 20 years ago, everything was on a triplicate form. But in the last...
I wouldn't know. Sarah always says I practiced when the dinosaurs were around. And yes, I may allegedly have used some triplicate forms in my life.
Right. So they do have IEP software to help them. That's where they're writing the document that includes those goals that we have to take data on and show progress on. And then they may have access to billing software where we can actually bill for the services that we provide in a school setting in some states, in some districts. And so there could be software, but that's even probably within the last 10 years there was software. Everything was always done on paper.
To the internet. If you think about, so our district, our city had an initiative where the district petitioned residents for a certain tax. What do you even call that? Like not a rider.
A levy?
They wanted extra funds to support implementation of tech requirements because our educational standards, a lot of states either use the Common Core standards or something like a variation of it. They revamped all of those. And it really was saying to be college and career ready, you had to involve technology. And so that's great. And that is the world that we go out into for work. But then when you're dealing with school districts, the funding is, limited. And they're looking at funding different things. And so they don't have extra funds laying around to do these tech initiatives. And one of the very first year, it was a bond. That was the word I was looking for. It was a bond that was passed for 3 years of funds. And the first year was just on infrastructure. So just, updating all of this antiquated equipment that they had and the wiring and everything for the schools and the servers and all of that kind of stuff. And that's the stuff that I don't think people think about when it comes to education, is that it's almost like how government is. It's like just this huge entity that has been doing things a certain way. And when the Common Core came around, they did try to revise things and make it more modern. But then it's like, well, to do that and to do it successfully, we have to have, things in place for that to happen. So that's even like the IEP software that we used. A lot of the software that's used in education is just antiquated. So it does the job and it's designed to do the job for many different types of professions. So whether you're a teacher or a psychologist or a speech path or whoever's using that software, everybody's accessing it. So it's not really honing in on the needs of who's using it. And the systems too, it's like things are developed. It reminds me of an experience I recently had with a webinar platform where we had been using Zoom. And then for other purposes, we were like, let's try GoToWebinar for a little bit just to see if we could get more data for our workflows and automation and things for emailing people that attended webinars. And it was just an older system. And I'm like, it feels like it was developed and that they've tried to modernize it, but it's not really meeting my needs like Zoom did. And that's how I feel like within our working in the schools, we get a lot of that software. It's just older software that they try to update to meet current needs, but it feels old and it feels a little clunky and not super user friendly.
Okay, so here's the big crescendo question. What is SLP Toolkit?
So really what we set out to do is create software that was for our people. So we know what it's like to work in the trenches. Oftentimes you're working with students in groups. And so you have to have something that makes sense to use in real time while you have, these adorable little faces in front of you, or maybe scruffy teenaged faces. But you have kids in front of you. You have people needing things from you all the time. You have all of these requirements, but I need something that manages me and all of those things that I do in a paper form, which we hate paper. I mean, I even hate going to my mailbox because I'm like, what am I going to do with all this paper? It all goes into recycling anyways. And so we really looked with our software to think about, for our role, how can we digitize and revolutionize the way that we are doing our jobs? And I feel like we've done a darn good job of the product that we have come up with.
Yeah, it's all about the data and assessment piece. And so, in order to determine whether or not these students are making progress, we have to be tracking that. So we have to have the session data. So that means I pull these students in, I have these goals that I'm targeting, and then I'm taking data on that in real time. But then we also have to have the data we're reporting quarterly or during their grading periods to show that progress. And that's like what Medicaid billing wants to see. And that's what the federal government wants to see is, are they truly making gains on these goals? They typically have a year's time to be able to kind of master that skill. And so the idea was we wanted to provide a technical way to do the things we've always done on paper. And so that we could do things as simple as average the data over time, have graphs. I mean, because if you think we're doing all of this on pen and paper with our little plus and minuses, and then I have to count them and I have to calculate the average, and then I'd have to physically go plot that on a graph. And so there was that component to it where we knew that there would be an easier way to be able to gather all that data in one place. But then once, even those ideas led us to, cool, I'm glad that we've got this software that enables us to have some ease there, but I still don't even know how I'm coming up with the goals all the time that I'm giving these students. And so there needs to be a better way to quickly assess a student so that I can get this comprehensive picture of their strengths and needs. And so we developed these informal screeners in the app. And so I can administer it very quickly. I can get this data that shows me, here's where the student's showing, areas of strength, and here's the areas that they're really struggling with, so that can help guide the goals that I'm going to develop for that student.
And so the idea is that we are just removing the paperwork, we're digitizing it. And the thing that we haven't really touched upon yet too is that school districts are under a lot of pressure and often encounter lawsuits. And so if you think about people writing things down in our chicken scratch handwriting, and is it accessible, and how do I share it? And what if this happened 5 years ago and now I'm in a lawsuit today? Really, the idea is to help streamline access to the data. But then in essence, what we're doing too is people are actually using their data. So it's not just something that I have to do because I have to, and it's there if somebody needs it. It's, well, here it is in front of me. I now can use it to make really awesome decisions for the students that I'm working with, so their outcomes become better. And then I feel more confident in the process too. Because going back to what Sarah said about, like, half the time, we didn't have a great way of even determining what a student's needs were to write a great treatment plan. So if we're sitting in a meeting with parents and teachers and doing these recommendations for students, and somebody asked the dreaded question, why? Why did you pick these goals? I mean, it was a lot of like, oh, well, everybody needs to work on vocabulary. Vocabulary is a really important goal versus now we have these built-in screeners that we've helped to develop that really show a strengths and needs profile. So we can say, this is what the student's doing well at. This is where the needs are. This is how we can support them. This is why we want to support it. This is how it connects into what they're doing in the classroom. And it just makes you feel like whether you've been doing it 20 years or 1 year, I know what I'm doing. I feel confident. And I feel like I can kind of fill those expert shoes that people are expecting me to walk in.
Let me repeat this back to make sure I'm understanding, because this also sounds similar to what I hear from high school teachers. You need to report on progress, but those goals are defined for you on a case-by-case basis, and you have to even show your own way of, here's how I know the student is making progress. And do you do that qualitatively and quantitatively?
So goals have to be written in a measurable way. So that's got to have some sort of quantifiable way that can be replicated. And so that's what gets tricky too. If it's something, we had kind of talked about the scope of what speech therapists work on. And so in the schools, a lot of goals center around articulation. So a student will say wabbit instead of rabbit. And so you're having them learn the R sound and use it in conversation. That's a very quantifiable. That's either I hear a W or I hear an R. It's a plus or a minus. I get a great percentage on that. But what about even what I referenced before, vocabulary? I can't write a goal that says student will improve vocabulary because what is the baseline for that? How do I know how much vocabulary they have now? And where do I want them to be by the end of the year? Because I have to be able to show that that student has moved and met this goal. That is part of our requirements under that federal law, IDEA. And so that's part of when you're writing goals, you have to make sure that they are measurable. And so you have to have data to help you get there.
And what you're saying is now with SLP Toolkit, you guys have created sort of a set of standards and a way of helping people assess in real time, giving them a starting point to have quantitative goals based on the progress their students are making.
Yeah, the thing in our field that is pretty typical is if any SLP in the United States were to get a student referred to them for an assessment, so to help determine, do they have a speech and language or communication impairment? Are they eligible for services through the school? Every SLP in the country has this sort of standardized process to do that. So whether it was me or Sarah or somebody in Texas or somebody in Alaska, we have these core standardized assessments we use. We usually have them speak in conversation and listen to that and look for trends and patterns. And we write up this report and we're really clear on what it means to be eligible. What is very variable is the way that we write our treatment plans. So everybody has to use that same format that the IEP is composed of. So it has information like demographics. It has a section for medical information. It has a section for present levels, which means what are their strengths, what are their needs across academic, behavioral, social, communication, academic areas. There's a section for service time. There's a section for goal writing. So all of that, the sections will be the same for every SLP in the country because those IEP components are what are mandated by federal law. What is not systemized and streamlined is how, as an SLP, do I get the information I need in order to fill in that template? And so that's really what SLP Toolkit was designed to do, is it gives you a way to standardize that process where in the past, even really common in a school setting is we'll have kids transfer in. So say it's October and I have a kid that transferred in on October 1st and I find out their IEP is due October 6th. And I'm like, awesome, by law, I have to write them a new treatment plan. I have 5 days to figure out how this kid ticks. And immediately what SLPs used to say in the past is, well, I better put them in evaluation because I need to give some standardized tests and I need to do all of those things I do during evaluation. How could I possibly write a treatment plan without them, ever evaluated them? So what SLP Toolkit does is it gives them a way to assess for their current levels. They're not evaluating in terms of eligibility, but it gives them the tools they need to be like, no problem. I'll pull them in. I'll give them one of the assessments. I'll use the tests that are built in for getting baselines on goals. There's even a goal bank in SLP Toolkit that helps write measurable goals. So it just gives them a system where I think that's half the battle in anything we do in life, whether it be as an SLP in a school setting or even, our day-to-day jobs. It's difficult to do things if you're always just kind of going by the seat of your pants in everything that you do. It only lasts so long that way.
I might have missed this in your guys' background, but Did either of you guys get undergrads in like computer science?
No.
And wait. Do we have backgrounds in business?
No.
So how did you go about actually developing the software? It feels like a lot of people have app ideas, but then they don't follow through.
I took a 2-week coding class. No. Wouldn't that be amazing? It was like, I took this little class and I just whipped this out. No, we hired developers, and even that was such a process. I mean, again, we have no background in any of this. Now, I love technology. I'm a great user of technology, but, trying to figure out what this was going to look like, even the idea of, are we doing an iOS app? Is this going to be web-based? What does this look like? And so after we make kind of the decision and we have some direction to go, I'm calling website developers.
That's where you Google. It was the key terms.
Yeah.
Website developer.
Right. I'm looking for a website developer. And so I'm calling these companies, I'm explaining to them what I need for this software. And we've got this really cool idea. And the guy would be like, I build websites.
Like landing pages.
The landing page. It's like a marketing site. Like, you need a software engineer,
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, cool. Can you give me some names? But even that basic knowledge we didn't have. So we clearly had to do a lot of research and start really getting out there and talking to different people. And then ended up finding our engineers who helped to build the program.
And then how big is your team now, and what's that kind of makeup?
Not big enough.
Yeah, well, it depends. We probably could use a couple more people, but ideally, we'll keep it as small as possible. So for a long time, it was just Lisa and I, and then we had contracted out development. And so we had a team of one engineer who was building the application. He also had a partner who was more of like the strategic business side of things. And they were really instrumental in a lot of the business decisions we made and the technology. And so then they've since come on and work with us. The business side of the team is more of our advisor. And then the engineer is now working with us full-time on projects and is kind of what would be a CTO if we had a bigger team. And then we do have a contracted developer now that we've added just this year. We have one employee who's more of kind of a glorified administrative assistant, but is really handling a lot of the stuff that Lisa and I were doing on a daily basis. And then we have a consultant for sales and a consultant for marketing.
And customer service. We have a couple. Too. We actually use graduate students in our field because we feel like that has been one of our important things that we wanted for our business was people that relate to what we do. And so even all of our communication, whether it be marketing or whatever it is, it's like, we are you, we know you. And so our customer service reps that we have hired have been grad students that are learning about the field and will be SLPs themselves. But it's been really cool to have that level of support there too.
Yeah.
And you guys are bootstrapped at this point, right?
Yeah. So Lisa and I put literally everything we had into getting this kicked off and building the app. And then about a year after we launched the application, then the developers did do sweat equity for a small percentage of the company. And so we do have a little bit of investment in terms of sweat equity, but yeah, we've never raised any funding.
What was that like emotionally, putting literally everything you have into some developers who you got referred to through website developers?
Terrifying. And I think that's where Lisa and I are very similar are not similar, but we had agreed very early on, like, we're doing this. We're going full force into this. And what does that look like? Oh, well, I've got credit cards and I have a life insurance policy that I can take from, and my husband can borrow from his 401k. And, Lisa moves in with her parents. And, so we're making all of these like, okay, how are we going to pull up this money and where's it going to come from? And so that was kind of that first step is we've got to make sure we have the money before we even go and start trying to get this software built. Yeah.
We had to.
But we were all in. Like, we knew no matter what, we were going to do this.
But there was a decision to be all in too. So there is one thing where it's like you have this idea and then you're looking for developers, but then you get it. Like, we ended up landing on developers that gave us a set price for a minimal viable product. And so we knew the exact amount of money we had to have. And then it became at that point, like, we've got to do it. So like you said, I was like, I have zero cash. I have credit that I am willing to max out as many cards as I have. And so at that point, it was really kind of your internal dialogue of, well, this could really suck. I don't think it's going to. I think it's going to be awesome, but it could really suck. And what would be the worst case scenario if everything just tanked? I'm like, I'd file bankruptcy and I'd just go back to being an SLP, full time. So is that really the worst thing that could happen in my life? And so it was terrifying. It was scary because especially when you do those charges and you pull out that money and you're actually giving it. But we had somebody say too once with the whole idea of investment, it's like, it's fascinating that you want other people to invest their money into something that you haven't put any money into. So you kind of have to be that, that you believe in your idea too, that you are willing to put some of your own stuff behind it.
Yeah.
When did you get your first customer or user?
Oh, it's the best thing.
Up here.
Yeah, we actually do. We printed out the receipt. And so this is, and I don't know if we've even said this yet, but I mean, maybe it's just assumed that it's a subscription-based software. And so you can either pay monthly or you can pay annually. And so we launched the software on January
15th,
2016. Yeah, 16. And a week later, actually, the funny part is we had used Stripe to take payment on the back end, and we didn't even have the login information because the developer set it up. So I don't even think we would have known.
We just got an email.
And so the developer calls and he goes, you saw that you just got your first payment, right? And I go, no, where do we see this at? Show us this. But it was about 1 week?
Yeah, I don't even think a week. I think it was it was sometime within that first week, and we were ecstatic.
Right. So we have a free version. They can sign up and use the product for as long as they want, but with only up to 5 students. And so as we mentioned earlier, typically an SLP has a caseload of 65. But we really wanted to give access to those tests and tools and resources that we had created. And so, it actually ended up being a really amazing thing because we're able to provide that service. And it's an easy sign up because you don't even have to put your credit card in and you get access to it for free. And so we were getting signups and continue to this day. We have, quite a huge amount of people using the free version. But to get that first paid one, in about a week's time was pretty cool.
Is the customer typically the therapists themselves at a school, or does the district pay for this?
Good question. I think because we were school-based SLPs, the initial goal was to go B2C. So we wanted to provide something and make it affordable for an individual therapist to be able to pay for this themselves. We also experienced not getting funding from special ed to buy resources.
For education. We live in the state of Arizona, and I think we're funded 48th out of the 50 states.
Yeah.
So we just did not expect people to provide materials for us. We have since found out that is not the case for other districts, and especially ones that have strong unions where it's like, oh no, you will give me. And I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know it worked like that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So there is some money there, but we were really wanting to make sure that, again, it was the pricing and making it affordable. And we knew what the salary range was and how much of our own money we spend on materials. And so what ended up happening though, is as we're getting more and more individual therapists using this, they're taking it to their district and they're saying, hey, can you buy this for me?
Everybody needs this.
And so now the district's coming to us. And so we do have quite a lot of organizations that have since purchased the program, which is ideal. We don't want individual SLPs
we don't really
to
have any
it.
outbound sales for districts at this point.
Yeah. So it ended up being kind of a cool process to have them coming to us and then closing that deal. And so now we're trying to decide whether or not we move more B2B. Clearly, one, we want them to pay for it, not the individual SLP out of their pocket.
It's just very exclusive.
But two, the lifetime value and everything else is just better with an organization.
We just want them to come to us. We want them to work for our product.
How many users are on the platform now? 4.5 years later?
About 28,000 SLPs have signed up to use the app.
And so we have in our field, just to give you some basic numbers, our overall representation in the United States is about 172,000 speech therapists. And of those, about 90,000 work in schools. So we make up the majority of our constituency in our national organization.
So you have 28,000 paying customers of the 90,000 potential?
No, not paying. And so that they can, use the app, like I said, for as long as they want with up to 5 students. Mm-hmm. And so that 28,000 people have signed up for the free version and are using the app. And about 5,500 now have paid for a subscription. And so our goal was, we wanted 10%. So our goal, our first big milestone will be when we hit 9,000 paying subscribers.
After this podcast, right?
Yes,
exactly.
That's right.
All speech therapists listen to this podcast.
We are the #1 speech therapist podcast out there. How Were there any big milestones or events that impacted that growth curve? You know, you got your first paid customer in 2016. I imagine that a lot of these customers have been closer to today. So what has moved the needle for you guys?
One of the huge things is that we, in January of 2017, we did an online conference that we didn't really know what it was going to be. We just knew it was free. We were going to offer some courses. Again, to give you a little backstory, we do get conferences offered through our national organization, but they tend to be very research heavy. So you have PhDs getting in front of an audience and sharing their research, but you never really walked away with a lot of practical information that you could implement. So we're like, let's do that. Who knows?
And the conferences are expensive.
Yes, they're super
We wanted
expensive.
to offer this for free.
And so Sarah is very charming, and she actually was able to convince some of our influencers in our field that these are the SLPs that are bloggers and they sell materials on Teachers Pay Teachers and have a large following. But we presented, we organized this conference with another speech therapist who has a business, and we got 6 of these influencers to also agree to present for free. And we didn't know who would sign up. Would anybody even hear about it? In that very first conference, we had about
12,000?
I was going to say around 10. So close, but 10. We were like, oh my gosh. So we are about to, in about 2 weeks, just under 2 weeks, will be our 8th time giving this conference. And we're at about 60,000.
Yeah, probably about 60,000.
That attend this.
Yeah.
And we still offer it for free.
Yeah. And I think that's the issue is, I mean, we had a couple of, I guess, barriers, you would call them. One, no marketing budget and no sales team.
No budget, period.
Yeah, no budget, period. And so to get this out there is one thing. But then also, this is a relatively new kind of concept that we didn't realize was going to take as much education as it did. We're telling these SLPs kind of maybe a different way to do things than they've been doing it before. And so there needs to be this, our marketing website can only tell them so much. They need to see this, And so that was one of the main reasons. So we thought, one, maybe this will help us grow, get eyeballs on the product. But 2, it gives us more of an ability to demo it in a very educational way that's still providing information to these people. And it just took off kind of after that. And so I think that was our big first huge
influx of.
Yeah, but we've always, again, this is built because we needed it. We obviously know where our audience lives. So from day one, we've been very active in our Facebook groups, where there's Facebook groups that have 50,000 school-based SLPs in it. We started on Instagram and doing Facebook ourselves and really building that community. And so everything was very organic and just very word of mouth.
So often on Upside, we have this implicit understanding of what a founder wants because they've taken venture capital money, so they've signed up for the race to $1 billion. What do you guys want out of this?
It was never about the revenue. Revenue's great. And obviously, we're not going to turn away dollars in our bank account, but it really always has been about bettering our profession. And I know that we always kind of joke, we're always like, it's for the children. And we do this little hand motion where we're like, it's for the children. But it really is. It's like, this is such a noble profession. People that, education in general, teachers, therapists that are working with kids. It is an underserved, overwhelming kind of position that just doesn't get the supports that it needs to be successful. And yet we always make do with what we have. We love the children that we work with. For us personally, it was about if we can get this tool in the hands, we believe in this. We're not trying to sell this in something we don't believe. We believe that this will help our peers. And we believe that in turn will help the children that they work with. So even if I'm not good at math, but if we took if we had our goal of even that first goal is 9,000 SLPs that are using it, but if they have an average of 65 students on their caseload, that's over 500,000 students that are being impacted by our software. And that's just a teeny tiny, that 9,000 number. And so it's really about the reach. We knew that we loved what we did working with students and our role as school-based SLPs, but it came a point where we missed that and we still wish we could be involved in that. But our reach right now through this software is much greater than what we could do as individuals on a school campus.
Yeah.
Do you have any regrets for not taking investment in the beginning or any plans to seek it out now?
No, I'll never say never. I could see that where there would be some benefits of taking an investor, probably more than anything for that strategic component of it. As we're continuing to learn and grow and develop this business, clearly there's going to be we're always actively seeking for people to help strategize with us. And so maybe a strategic partner or something like that. But no regrets on not taking the funding. So grateful we bootstrapped this. Had somebody offered us money in those initial days, we would have taken it in a heartbeat, because it was so scary and it was so stressful. I honestly can say I don't think we would have accomplished what we have over the last few years without us just doing that grind and figuring this out and starting absolutely in debt and working our way out on our own and having that control and all of that. So no, I'm really grateful that we didn't initially. And as far as taking investment in the future, again, we don't need it. We've been profitable since year 2 and have been able to invest our own money back into the company and keep things growing and moving. So I don't really see maybe why to do that unless we start to kind of branch out. And we have talked about that. Are we going to start including special education teachers? And there's occupational therapists and physical therapists working in the school setting. And they're calling us and asking for this kind of software for themselves. And so, to grow and expand into other markets, maybe, but as long as we can continue to have the money to invest in it ourselves, we probably will.
This is awesome. Learned so much. Such an awesome story. If people want to learn more about you guys or the work you're doing at SLP Toolkit, where should they go?
Our website is slptoolkit.com, so pretty straightforward there. But I think also we show a lot of our personality on our social media platforms, especially Instagram. That has been from the beginning, I feel like, one of our strengths in not only knowing our market as work individuals and knowing the job that they do, but we've really garnered a following of people that are champions. And like, we show goofy sides of ourselves and real sides of ourselves. And so it's always, as Sarah says, it's always a treat.
Yes.
To follow us on Instagram.
That's right.
Hey listener, have you ever wanted to get a message in front of the Upside audience but weren't sure how to sponsor the show or weren't able to do a long-term sponsorship? Well, now you can just go to upside.fm/classifieds and let our audience know anything that's going on in your world, whether it's an event, an application, a special coupon or deal, or just letting them know who you are, what your company does. All you have to do is go to upside.fm/classifieds and you can place an ad on this show. That's upside.fm/classifieds. All right, Eric, we just spoke with Lisa and Sarah of SLP Toolkit. Where do you want to begin our discussion of this bootstrapped company today?
When I was in grade school, we had the mobile unit, and I knew you went out there a couple times in your grade school history to get kind of checked out, and you had to say your R's and you had to go through this thing, and they do an assessment. And then if you were fine, you never went back to the mobile unit. That is the entire extent of my understanding of what an SLP is or was before this interview.
Same. Shockingly little context or information about this role, other than I just remember when I first went to college and I was talking to a lot of the girls I was graduating with, what they're going to do in college. A lot of them said Speech Language Pathologist. And I was like, oh, okay. But I just never knew what that was. So cool to get a lot more context on that role. And as expected, it does sound like it is a highly challenging and intense role to do that within school systems, and has become even more burdensome over the years from a standpoint of expectations, reporting, everything that we've seen from the level of teachers also appears to apply to speech language pathologists.
It seems like it's kind of a double-edged sword there, right? The job is difficult and challenging, and there's all these requirements and reports that you have to file, and the list goes on and on and on. But you also have a federally protected job, which pays fine. It's not the highest paying job of all time at 55 to 65 starting salary with the need for a master's. But there's kind of this, once you're in, you can kind of be there for a while thing, which is nice, as long as at least as far as I know. Maybe there is a way to remove people, but
I really can't. I mean, the standout thing for this interview for me, to just cut to the chase, I really can't overstate how impressive it is to me that these two women with no experience in business or startups or products, software, any of that, jumped in, went in both feet first, both of them, put their entire savings on the line, put their credit on the line. Were calling people to help them develop a website when they needed an app, like figured it all out, and were profitable since year 2. Like, that is incredibly impressive to me that people do that. Like, I know we talk to founders on this show all the time, and that's not a totally different story than some founders, but this is just not something that was within their realm of experience whatsoever.
It is a little different though, because with a lot of the founders we talked to on the show, yes, maybe they put their entire life savings into developing the MVP and getting this thing up and running. But usually within the first 18 months or so, they join an accelerator, or they find someone to share the downside risk with. In this scenario, there is no one to share the downside risk. She said specifically, I figured, what's the worst that happens? I go bankrupt. And I was like, wow, you worked for 15, 20 years and you're just like, yeah, we'll just restart.
And Lisa moved in with her mom, they said, to do this, like more than a decade into her own career. And what also struck me about Lisa and Sarah in terms of their humility, if someone did have the same story as Lisa and Sarah, a lot of times that's like the narrative that they tell you right off the bat. They kind of tell their hero's journey of, here's what I did, here's the risk that I took, and here is how it paid off. They wouldn't have even brought any of that up if we didn't ask. If we didn't ask them, how are you funding this? How did this happen? We wouldn't have known that they put all of their savings into it, that they put all of their credit into it, that Lisa moved in with her mom. That wasn't part of the story they're trying to tell. They were focused totally on the company, the tool, and the people that they're helping.
And Jay, you know that through this podcast, I've learned a lot about venture capital. You've learned a lot about venture capital. One of the things that venture capital does not do well currently is fund businesses like this, because this business is never going to be $1 billion business. It's just not. The market isn't big enough. The price point isn't high enough. The size of the potential SLP community isn't big enough without expanding into 18 additional products and kind of becoming a product conglomeration in the ed tech space. This just isn't a venture backable, scalable company, but at the same time, it can become a great business. And it already is.
Profitable since year 2. They said they had 5,500 paid customers, and at a $216 subscription per year, that's close to $1.2 million ARR, which is a nice little business for a bootstrapped company and just a couple of employees. When they talked about their customer being the speech language pathologist, my first thought was, man, I know that that's got to be a tough market, because they probably don't have any budget to buy this under their school, and to buy it as an individual. Like I've heard of some startups trying to sell to teachers before and expecting the teacher to pay out of pocket. There's just not a lot of margin there. Like, these teachers aren't trying to bring on software tools to help them with this job that they already feel like isn't paying them enough. But 5,500 paid SLPs out of about 28,000 accounts and a total of 172,000. Like, there's a lot of room to grow and build there.
And 90,000 work in schools. They're almost at 10% penetration of a market without really doing anything on the acquisition side outside of that online conference, which I love. They just got 10,000 to 12,000. Can you imagine if we just got 10,000 to 12,000 people signed up for a conference that we just threw out there?
I love businesses like this that are niche, and to your point, not necessarily the venture backable business that investors are looking for, but for the same reason. There's a lot of opportunity there because people aren't looking at that as this giant market to get a bunch of funding and build a software tool. They came in, they knew their customer, there's a problem, they build a solution for it. They're probably one of just a small number of tools in the space, if they even have competitors in the space. And because that whole group is so in need and so tightly knit, it's grown pretty quickly for them over the last 5 years.
Yeah, and I think you can take a lot of this into context when you think about, they made a kind of a joke about it, but they did it's for the children mission and vision. And at the beginning, it sounds a little kitschy or like kind of tongue in cheek. But then when they started diving into what that actually means and how they've impacted directly 500,000 students with this software, that seemed to be the thing that really resonated and meant something to them. And if they can build a profitable business while impacting students who need help and allow the SLPs to spend more time to actually build the relationships and do the guidance counseling and all of the things that come with this job rather than the paperwork, I think that's why they're doing this.
We haven't brought up our standard deal memo questions in a while, but just to remind ourselves, how committed is this founder? Committed enough that they put all of their life savings into it. What are the founder's chances of success in this business and in life? I'd bet pretty good based on the progress of the business so far. Why has this founder chosen this business? That was pretty apparent too. Even putting aside the what does winning look like in terms of revenue and my return, because they haven't taken investment and don't want my money, I think that this is a great business, a great founding team, really great story that I'm glad we got here on the show.
Seems like if they did need funding for growth or if they wanted to accelerate a little bit, this is one of those businesses that fits so nicely with the interviews we've done with Clearbank, even though they tend to focus more e-commerce and SaaS, or with Tyler Tringus's Earnest Capital and the shared earnings agreement that he set up that has the ownership profit component. I think that this is like one of those businesses where it's a fantastic business. It's growing. It's going to keep on growing. It's just not going to hit $1 billion. And there's nothing wrong with that.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. You can tweet at us at UpsideFM or send us an email, hello@upside.fm. We love stories like this. We love founding teams like this. So if anyone comes to mind, email us, hello@upside.fm. Otherwise, we'll talk to you next week.
That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's guest, so shoot us an email at hello@upside.fm or find us on Twitter @UpsideFM. We'll be back here next week at the same time talking to another founder in our quest to find upside outside of Silicon Valley. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave us a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Eric and I decided there were a couple things we wanted to share with you at the end of the podcast, and so here we go. Eric Hornung and Jay Klaus are the founding parties of the Upside podcast. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interest in the companies which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinion and do not reflect the opinions of Duff & Phelps LLC and its affiliates, Unreal Collective LLC and its affiliates, or any entity which employ us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Never mind, bro, that can't be matched. I'm lighting it on fire, used to run victory laps, and still I'm not even tired. It's all about the timing, yeah, that's what they say. Well, I'ma keep on rhyming.